is real. Listen. Hi, I'm Traci.
And I'm Kathy.
And this is Curious Explorers. So, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Curious Explorers. I'm Traci. Kathy is on location exploring things deeply mysterious and probably a bit scary. But you know what? I get to interview my mentor and friend, Lori Williams, all by myself today. So super excited. And I'll share it with Kathy when she gets back, of course. So I'm going to introduce you to Lori in case you're one of the, 2 or 3 people who doesn't know about Lori Williams. And then I'll let Lori tell you more about herself. So Lori Williams, master remote viewer and teacher extraordinaire. She's got, Lori, over 25 years of experience remote viewing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we're heading on through 30 years now.
Oh, good. Oh, goodness. That's amazing. As you may already know, Lori studied extensively under retired Sergeant Lyn Buchanan, one of the original Stargate remote viewers. And you probably already know that Stargate is the formerly top secret military psychic spying program. So I can't even imagine the stories Lori has to tell, and probably can't. The inside scoop from Lyn. But Lori's also studied under Mel Riley, another of the original remote viewers. And Lori ultimately became the first civilian to be certified as a controlled remote viewing instructor. Lori can tell you more about her actual training with Lyn, which honestly took an unbelievable amount of dedication. I don't know how you did it. We'll talk about that in a minute. But since then, Lori's trained thousands of people worldwide in the discipline of remote viewing. And it really is a discipline. It is very structured. It is, I think, the most structured form of psychic work that I know of. Lori offers trainings in everything from beginning through advanced remote viewing, medical applications, and even courses beyond that for the people who are really dedicated and really good. Lori is a widely sought after teacher and speaker, and she's been interviewed on numerous podcasts, radio shows, TV, and documentaries. She's got an average hit rate or success rate, accuracy rate of 87%. And if you know anything about doing psychic work and anybody who's actually been evaluated, that's like the cream of the crop. That is the top of the heap. So it's really outstanding. Lori's worked with law enforcement. She's worked on missing persons cases. She's worked with corporations. She's worked on archaeological expeditions, helping people to find, Lori, I can't even imagine, lost treasure, lost civilizations. She's helped people with healing, self-healing by using remote viewing, and also has led professional intuitive teams for a whole bunch of other purposes. I'm going to stop there because, Lori, I'd rather you talk more about what you can do and what you've done and what remote viewing offers. But again, welcome to the show. So good to have you here.
It's so great to be back. You're such a dear friend, and I was so thrilled with the opportunity to be able to come on your show again. We had such a good time on the other show when you were first starting out, and that ended up getting a ton of views. And
oh my God. It's the
so
most organic views I've ever gotten out of any show. And it was one of the first. And I actually think it was one of the worst jobs I ever did because I was brand new to the world of interviewing. So that's a testament to your huge fan base.
I did not think you did a terrible job at all. You know, sometimes when I go, I mean, like, this is my second podcast this week, and then there's another one on Friday, and then we've got other ones coming up. So it's really funny because sometimes, depending on the podcast and the podcaster, sometimes the questions are the same every time. You know, like, how did you get into this? And you know, and the same. And so eventually, after all these years of doing them, you know, you get kind of like, gosh, it'd be interesting to talk to get into, go a little deeper, you know. And so I felt like the one that we did, we really talked about, you asked interesting questions and we got into some very interesting stuff. So I thought you did a great job. And the next Barbara Walters, right?
Yes. Maybe there'll be an opening. But you're so, you're such an interesting person and you've had such an interesting journey because you have been interviewed so much. I think this interview, maybe I think we should focus more on, just a quick overview of what remote viewing is as a technology.
Mhm.
I do want you to just do the little Cliff Notes version of what was required of you to train with Lyn Buchanan, because it's not like you just go show up at, however many times and he says, "All right, now you can teach." This was like a huge thing.
It
And
was, and me, I had to drive 6 hours to get to his house.
oh my God.
So when I wanted
Every week, right?
yeah,
Wasn't it?
every other
Oh
week.
my
It was
god.
every other
Oh my
week,
god.
and so
For
at the
years.
yeah, for at least 2 years, and then I continued on after he certified me to teach basic. I continued going to almost everything he taught, and we joke, he and I joke because I was like the bad penny. I think for Lynn, it was sort of like saying, "I want you to get me the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West," and just assuming I would never be able to get it, right? So he's like, if you want to, because I was like, I want to teach your course. I want to teach your course. And he was like, well, if you want to teach my course, you're going to have to come to every class I teach until I determine that you're ready. And so, and here he's thinking, she has 7 kids. She has a crazy full-time job resettling refugees. And she's, going 24/7. There's no way she's going to come to every class I teach. So every single class I'm showing up at his door and he's like, oh my gosh, he's really here.
Oh
and,
my god.
and
But really
so
amazing.
yeah, he admits that he really didn't ever think I would do it when he put it out there. He just thought she's not going to do it, but then I did. And then he reached a point, he and his wife, they reached a point in which this was so much work for them that he wanted to just hand me the basic classes that were being taught in the US. So I worked actually pretty much as a contract employee for his company for many years, teaching all the basic classes that were in the US at that time. He would travel outside the US to teach, but I taught the ones in the US. And then eventually I went with them and taught in Ireland and some, we taught in Canada and different places. But it was really a great time. And it was so easy for me. All I had to do was open my door and teach. I didn't have to recruit. I didn't have to handle any of the business stuff because his wife did all that. And then when his wife reached a point in which she was just like, Lori, I just can't, I can't keep doing this. You're going to have to strike out on your own. Then I got shoved out of the nest. So, so right away I was like, well, how do I get people to even know that I'm doing this? I'm a nobody, how do I do this? And so right away, though, word of mouth, I just started in my hometown. And I thought, well, I'll teach a class here and I'll make it a special class for Amarillo, Texas. And I had 11 people sign up like that. I was in a store when I decided to do it. And I said to Jim, I'm thinking maybe I should offer a class here in Amarillo and I'll give like a special Amarillo discount. And all literally people heard me and they lined up right there in the store and said, I'll sign up right now. And it was so incredible. So my first class on my own ended up being a big class, like the biggest class I'd ever taught, which really shocked me. But then I had a realization also. Lynn used to always say a poem to me, and the poem was, he who hath a thing to sell and goes and whispers in a well is not as apt to win the dollar as he who climbs a tree and hollers. and so and so I
That's
never
very folksy, very
yeah,
Lynn.
I never forgot that poem. And which is really funny, especially considering that Lynn has never been one to climb a tree and holler at all, ever. He doesn't
No.
toot his own horn in any way. So I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this as a business, and Jim had already said, 4 years earlier, he let me quit my day job.
Your
So I was,
husband,
yeah, my
your
wonderful
lovely
husband,
husband.
Jim, he's like, I'll support you. I believe in you. You can quit your job. So I quit my job and now I was completely dependent on my ability to market this, but I knew nothing about marketing. So that's when I decided that if I really wanted to make a success of this and reach people outside a very narrow circle of the woo woo folks that I was surrounded by, I was like, I need to learn about marketing. And I hated the idea of marketing because I had always hated sales. I didn't want to be a salesperson. But I ended up kind of falling into it. And then I paid for this course and for this mastermind and this coaching program. I think altogether over the years, I think I've invested about $200,000
Oh my
in
goodness.
learning about marketing and online marketing and that kind of a thing. And in the course of it, I learned how to be a businesswoman. I don't think I'm a very good businesswoman in many aspects, but in some aspects, I got pretty savvy, but for me, it's never been about money. It's always been about how can I reach people outside of a little tiny sphere of, how can I reach the masses who have never heard of controlled remote viewing? That,
100%.
you know.
100%.
And so, they say that Henry Ford said if I had asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So
Good point.
cars, people had never conceived of cars. So I think that it's the same thing. If you were to say to somebody, I have something I could give you that if you were able to control your ability to access information and you could get information whenever you needed it, how would that affect your career? How would that affect your relationships? How would that affect your finances? How would that affect your life? I mean, people would be like, "Oh my God, yeah, sign me up, right? What is it?" So that's what CRV is. It's really a tool that you can get information from anywhere in all of time and space, and that sounds like a huge, oh, come on, come on, really? But it's based on brain science, the interaction between left and right brain, and it's based on the understanding of how the mind works between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, and the body being the link between those two minds. And it's a written set of protocols that they had to develop for the US military when the Russians were getting all our military secrets and they didn't know how they were getting them. I love your cat. And they didn't know how they were getting them, and so they somehow, this man that was planning to defect from Russia, they were able to get information from him showing and proving that Russia had a psychic spying program. So our government went to the top secret think tank at Stanford Research Institute and hired two physicists who had pioneered the laser, Harold Puthoff, who we call Hal Puthoff, and Russell Targ, and hired these two guys and said, we've got to figure this out. So they started researching and they came up with more evidence that psychic phenomena and ESP exists than the FDA has, proving that aspirin is effective as a pain reliever. So meanwhile, then, after they started gathering all this evidence, and they did an experiment which caused a huge furor when they tasked this man. They tasked two remote viewers, actually, with the task of remote viewing some place they had chosen in the woods. And it turned out that, unbeknownst to the tasker, there was a top secret underground military base nearby. And they not only described it to a T, but they also even gave the code names that were written on the files, which scared the US military because
Of
they thought,
course.
oh my gosh, these guys are moles. And they investigated them to the max to make sure they weren't getting, if they suddenly had new cars and new houses, then they're like, okay, they're getting paid somewhere, but they didn't. And there was no evidence that they were moles. So then they went, okay, that's even scarier, because if this is real, then that means we have no protection. We have no secrets. And that was pretty terrifying, I think, for the US military, for any government to think we don't have any secrets because anything can be remote viewed. So
I'm sure it still scares people,
I
and
think so.
I can't even fathom. I'm gonna be thoughtful about how I do and don't say things, but there's so much going on. And I'm wondering what people would do if they knew how, I don't wanna say easy, but it's not impossible to discern what somebody's doing or what they're going to do and what their
Mhm.
intentions are and what they're thinking.
I had a student who called me and she was freaked out. She had taught her husband, who wasn't interested in remote viewing at all, but she had taught him how to pick three very disparate targets, like cut out three pictures from a magazine that are very different from each other and put them in three different envelopes. And then they would associate the pictures with, for example, buy that stock, don't buy that stock, and I don't feel like playing with you today. And so those were the three choices. And that just to help the listeners understand how that works. So buy the stock, they would have a stock in mind that they were considering buying. And buy that stock would mean go ahead and purchase it. The other one would be don't purchase it. And the other one would give an out to the subconscious if that particular day it just didn't want to get involved with anything. Then it would actually describe that photo that means I don't want to play with you today. And so so one of the photos, so she would do a remote viewing session, and then she would give her results to her husband, who would then look at the three photos and decide which of the three photos she had come closest to describing, and then that would be the action they would take. Either they would buy the stock, they wouldn't buy it, or whatever. So, one of the photos was a photograph of Obama in the war room at the White House with his advisors, and the caption read something like Obama and his counselors are discussing Iraq, something about discussing Iraq. And she called me because when you're doing this type of thing where you're just looking for a quick choice, you just do a really fast, maybe 10 minutes on a session, you just get enough descriptors that somebody could
Right.
look at it and say, okay, I think she's describing this photo right here. So she described that photo and even said it's a group of men sitting at a table and talking about Iraq. That's what she said in her little description.
That's wild.
And so when she discovered that that was one of the photos, she called me and she said, if I did that in 10 or 15 minutes, what could I have gotten had I really worked on it? If I really wanted to know what they were talking about, like in depth, that's kind of frightening to think about. And it reminds me of a story in which these two remote viewers, Lyn Buchanan being one, was being the monitor, and Dave Morehouse being a viewer, according to Lyn's telling of the story, where the target was a race in shallow water in South America, taking place in South America. It was photos from National Geographic. It was an article in National Geographic, and
A
the
practice
it
session?
was a practice session
Okay.
in the
So
military.
not okay.
Yeah, just
Sorry.
practice. They just chose randomly this story from National Geographic with photos, and it was about this annual race that would take place in this very shallow water that was full of big boulders, and they would have these special longboats that were made for traversing shallow waters, and there would be one guy in the back with a stick navigating, kind of using the stick to push the boat through, and a guy on the front on his hands and knees looking for the boulders and saying, go left, go right, telling the guy where to go. So Dave Morehouse is describing this target. He doesn't speak a word of Spanish, and everything, of course, taking place at the target was in Spanish because it was in South America. And he says, "I'm hearing voices, and there's the sound. It sounds like Recha, Recha, Skerda, Skerda." And not speaking any Spanish, that's what he heard. Well, derecha and izquierda means left and right in Spanish. And so the way that story impacted me as a brand new student of remote viewing 30 years ago was, oh my gosh. I mean, you could literally overhear conversations then. I mean, that he literally heard the words that were being spoken in a language he didn't speak and was able to repeat them. And as I told one of my students I had a student who worked for Homeland Security, and she was doing a session with me as a monitor. And it was just a practice session, and it was a picture of a 30-year-old Jane Goodall. And Jane Goodall is what,
Oh,
now
yeah.
in her 80s, right? Uh,
At least.
yeah, and I think she's pushing 90. But anyway, and so this was a 30-year-old Jane Goodall. So she had brown, straight hair that came to about, shoulder length, and she was in shorts and a top, and she was kneeling in front of a chimpanzee out in the woods. She had some food in one hand, and the chimpanzee was reaching for the food, and with her other hand she was holding the index finger of the other hand of the chimpanzee, right? And then behind her was this four-poled rooftop thing that just provided shade, and it was covering a picnic table that had some equipment on it. So I'm looking at this photo and I'm thinking, okay, here's her target. This is what she's going to do. Well, she did an amazing job. She described Jane Goodall to a T, to her hair and what length it was, to her clothing, to this Caucasian young woman in her early 30s. And then she said, and she's holding something black and rubbery and cylindrical, which was the index finger of the chimpanzee. And then she said, and I think she's got like some kind of something edible in her hand, and she's reaching out to hand it to this black furry thing. So I'm like amazed. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she's doing so great. This was her second day of basic class, and she's doing this amazing job of describing. And I thought, oh, she's going to be so thrilled when she gets the feedback and she sees how well she did. And then she goes, oh, I think there's a house behind her. And I said, well, move into that what you're perceiving as a house. And she said, oh, it has no walls, because it was just four poles with a canvas roof, right? She said, oh, it has no walls. And then she said, I feel like I'm looking down on linoleum, that has a pattern, and she starts sketching this pattern, and and uh and so then, we end the session, and I'm so excited to show her how well she did. And so I tell, I'm showing her, and she seems so unimpressed with her own description of, her very accurate description of Jane Goodall and the monkey. And all of a sudden her eyes got really big, and she said, "Oh my gosh, Lori, look, I drew the pattern on the tablecloth on the picnic table that's under the thing." She said, "I drew the exact pattern." And that's what impressed her. That's what freaked her out. And she said, "Lori, that means I was there. I drew that pattern. I was there." And I said, "Well, I don't want to freak you out more than you're already freaked out, but not only were you there, but you were there 50 years ago."
Oh, it's but that's such a great story. And just for the people who have not yet done remote viewing, because I know that some people in the audience are curious. Some people know a lot about some topics and not others, but this very structured psychic discipline really does train you to get specific details and write them down and sketch them as you perceive them. And what you're saying is, you are not limited by space or time. Right, and in some cases, it really seems more like people are viewing the photograph that they're gonna see the feedback, but in other things, it's like, no, you really are transported to the place, and you'll find things that are off the frame of
Hmm.
the photograph. The other thing I wanna point at that you said that I think is really important for people to know is that people can have remarkable, sessions right from the get-go.
Hmm.
And I mean, we all have good days and bad days, but I think that is one of the most persuasive things that somebody can be completely naive to psychic work in general and then come and produce something like this.
It was,
Because
yeah.
the target could have been anything in the known universe. It could have been
Hmm.
an apple. I mean,
Yeah.
it could have been, the Eiffel Tower or wherever else, all the things that our mental noise would produce, which sometimes also is the target.
Yeah.
But it's amazing.
It is. It is so amazing. I've had students like from the very get-go, right from their first session, just do amazing things. I remember I had an engineer from Halliburton taking my class, and his target was a photograph of I think a wedding in like in some communist country where you have to get married like in a court, in a courtroom, and so it wasn't a religious ceremony, but he's coming out of the courthouse carrying his bride, who is wearing this cute little white dress, a little short white dress, and he's carrying her, and the people are throwing whatever they're throwing, rice and whatever, and he's carrying her like this, and the viewer goes, "Oh, oh, this male human has something in his arms, and he's going like this, and whatever it is that he's got in his arms, he loves it very much."
Aw. He just missed that it was actually his new wife.
Yeah. But I thought, wow, this is his very, very first session, so this was pretty amazing.
It really is.
With just having gone through, a couple of days of training. But so the idea behind controlled remote viewing, we actually, just to give like a quick overview of the structure.
Definitely.
In the structure of it, the first thing you do is a section called the administrative section, where you learn to set aside any stuff you've got going on in your head, like that fight you had with your boss yesterday, or the fear of failure you might be experiencing, or whatever you've got going on. You learn to set that aside, kind of clear the decks. And then you go into your session and you write down the coordinate number that you've been given, because we associate a number with every session. And the purpose
A
of the number,
random
just,
or a
yeah.
number that just is not it's not like the latitude and longitude. It's not anything anybody could figure out what it
No.
is.
In fact, nowadays, I don't even use the date backwards anymore. I just make up a six-digit number, that's in a framework. It's more for databasing, really, that you can kind of track sessions based on a database number. So, so you have this number, you write the number down, and for your purposes as a remote viewer, the purpose of writing the number down is just to get your pen moving so you can do a squiggle. And we call that squiggle an ideogram. And the squiggle then gives you information. It's kind of a physical graphic that allows you to connect to your subconscious mind. And I could really teach for nonstop for 2 weeks about ideograms, but just to give a quick thing, it's just a squiggle essentially, and a scribble, and then you kind of analyze the squiggle based on some rules we give you. And then you come up and you determine that that squiggle means overall concepts of maybe land, water, man-made, motion energy, space, air, human or biological, etc. You know, some basic ideas. And then you can move into the next phase where you actually move to those things. Like I'm going to move to that land and describe it. I'm going to move to that water and describe it. I'm going to move to that human and describe it, etc. And so you move to those things and you describe them. And then as you come up with descriptions, you can move to some of the descriptions and describe those. And you know, and you can kind of then go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then as you move on to more advanced phases of remote viewing, you learn how to connect to people and actually communicate with their subconscious mind, which of course is really handy when you're working on missing people cases. I was able to work on a kidnapping in which I was able to connect with a guard who was guarding these kidnap victims, who gave me a ton of information, including the name of the organization that had done the kidnapping, which turned out to
Which
be
is
accurate.
crazy.
I
That's
know.
crazy.
And what was really amazing about that was that the investigating officers had never heard of this group. So when I gave them this name, they didn't know if that group existed. And then they researched and investigated and found out, yep, it sure enough did exist. And it was the group that had done the kidnapping. So, you know, you can get information. I worked on an airplane crash, and I know nothing about airplanes. I know nothing about engines or mechanics whatsoever.
Me neither.
You know, I'm just like a zero when it comes to that. But this is what's amazing about remote viewing is that in the remote viewing of it, I'm describing how the plane is tilting and suddenly it's filling with smoke and I'm hearing all the sounds. And then I said, something is failing. And at that point, my monitor said, move to the failing and describe, because that was the whole purpose of the session, was to just find out what failed, what caused the crash. So I'm like, as soon as I hear move to the failing and describe, I'm seeing this object and I'm going, oh, it's this. And I'm kind of move, you know, like a good Italian. I'm talking with my hands, and my monitor said, "Could you sketch that for me?" And my reaction was like, no, I can't sketch that. I mean, I don't know anything about machines. Well, could you try to sketch it for me? So I ended up doing this very detailed sketch, several of them actually, to describe this whole piece of machinery. And a good monitor's job is to stay completely just no expression on your face. You don't want to give away anything by your facial expressions or your reactions in any way. And so my monitor's very good at that, was totally non-reactionary. And I'm thinking, I'm probably boring this poor monitor to death. So I finished the session, and then a little while later, we're heading out the door to leave, and I was like, "Oh, sorry if I bored you," you know. And the monitor was like, "That is like the best session you've ever done." And it turned out we actually got pictures of this engine part, and the monitor, whose dad was an airplane mechanic, was able to tell me what all the parts were for and what those
Oh,
were.
wow.
And here I know nothing about that kind of thing, and I accurately drew the inside of the internal part of this airplane engine and the part that failed. And I was like, how
It's
does that?
amazing.
And I'm the viewer, and I'm like, how does that even work? How can that even be possible? You know, like that's crazy. So,
But it's so interesting that you're saying that though, because you have taught this for a long time. You have studied this and practiced and been I'm going to say I was going to say practitioner. It's not really the right word. I maybe have a little bit of my other hat still perched on my head. But as a professional remote viewer, you've had thing after thing after thing that has been uncanny and shown you how incredible this tool can be, but yet it can still blow your mind
it still
because you
does.
can sketch the thing that you have no idea what it is. And it almost is, I almost think it's better that way, right? Because then we get our conscious mind that's trying to make it look like this thing that we think it is out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so, you know, and right now we're doing something, you know, you'd think after 30 years I'd be like ready to quit. I'm 68, you know, I'm great grandma. And, you know, and sometimes I do think about like, oh, you know, Lori, you should have retired a while back. But then something
Don't do
always
it.
happens. Something always happens that gets me all like stirred up again, you know? And right now, like this year, 2025, I really wanted to do something. I'm always looking for gaps because my passion, the whole reason I'm doing this at this age is because I'm so passionate to see people reach the top, right? And my vision for my school is that I would have materials that could reach every kind of learner, whether they're hands-on learners or people who learn from listening or people who learn from reading or people who learn from seeing. And so I thought, well, I want to have something from the rank beginners all the way through the most advanced so that they can get it all in one school, right? And I was super excited about that when I started this vision. And so as a result, we ended up, we only have two books out, but I'm working hard I want to
Me
get the rest of them out, the whole series, so that you can learn all phases of remote viewing from a book if you needed to, because that would also be the least expensive way to learn. So for people who are good at learning from books, then I mean, I have a son-in-law who teaches guitar, and he's never had a teacher. He learned everything he learned about guitar from books.
That's
I
unbelievable.
know, and and he is like an amazing guitarist. And I'm just like, how can I could never learn from guitar from a book. I play guitar, but I certainly didn't learn it from a book. And so, something technical like remote viewing and learning to play the guitar, there's people who can learn from that. And it's also an inexpensive, relatively inexpensive way to learn. So I really want to get those books out.
I'm mousing over to the names of your books because I forgot to mention that, and I'm glad
Oh,
you did. So, one is Boundless, your how-to guide to practical remote viewing, phase 1, a how-to series to learn controlled remote viewing. And then the second one is Monitoring, a guide for remote viewing in professional intuitive teams. So, those are out you're working on others.
I'm
They're
working
they're
on Boundless
so
2 right
clear.
now. Yeah, I'm working on Boundless 2, and I want to get all six phases. There's six phases of the remote viewing process, and I'm hoping that Boundless 2 will, they say that if you have a book that's over 40,000 words, that if it's a how-to book, no one will read it. So, got to keep it under 40,000 words. So that's why Boundless 1 just is phase 1, but I'm hoping I can get phase 2 and phase 3 in the next one in 40,000 words and do it justice. And then I'm going to do 4, 5, and 6. And I'm going to do these in line with my courses because now I have video
Great.
courses that are basic, intermediate, and advanced that go all the way through phase 6 on video.
Self-paced?
Pardon
They're
me?
self-paced? I'm sorry, they're
Yes, they're
self-paced?
self-paced video courses. Yes.
Great.
Those three courses each have 6 modules. You get one module per week for the first 6 weeks. You can take as long as you need. You get to keep them forever. But every module has 7 videos. So literally, you could do it in 6 weeks if you watched a video a day. And then we have a test, an exam at the end, because I didn't want to be a diploma factory. So people actually take the final exam, and then I meet with them and go over the final exam with them in
That's
both
great.
basic and intermediate. And so it's really fun because I've been looking for gaps in my training. Is there anything I'm missing? And I was also looking for ways to make the club. I have a club for the viewers because I thought, wow, what I would have loved to have had when I was really new at this is a community that we met regularly, and we had regular assignments, and the teacher would go over the assignments and help teach and help me understand better and be there to answer my questions. So we have a forum and a club, and people are in this club, and they get free months in the club when they buy the course, etc. So I was really excited about this, and I wanted to make the club more exciting. So with the intermediate and advanced students, I came up with this idea. So I'm super excited to tell you about this because this is
I'm super
something that's
excited to
new.
hear it.
Yeah. So I thought, well, how about if I said, okay, students, this next few months, I'd like for you to come up with targets that you would love to have a remote viewer view for you. And then you present your idea for a target for this month to me. I'll go over your target. And so I got the first few submissions I got were things like a soccer game, a racetrack. And I'm like, hey guys, I can give out a soccer game. I want you to come up with something. If you climbed Mount Everest and could talk to God, no, I'm not saying God lives at the top of Mount Everest, but
Maybe.
if you could talk to God, what would you ask God? If you could, you got God right there. You could ask anything. Are you going to ask about a racetrack or a soccer game? No.
Only if you have a lot of money on it.
So yeah, really, maybe. So so then I said, what, come on, come up with some stuff. So then they submitted some things, and they, we got long, I got long lists, long involved stuff. Well, I wanted about, no, this and this and this and this. And I read through that and I was like, okay, but they didn't know how to put this into a framework that would work for remote viewing. And so I realized that's where the gap was, that they didn't know how to come up with a target for themselves and then frame it so it would really be a great remote viewing target. Because if you don't frame your question, if you don't even know how to get to your question, then you're not going to get results that are actionable or that would make you happy, right?
So important.
So important. And I said, I don't want you guys to walk away from my school, after tons of training and not know how to do this, because then you'll always be dependent on someone else giving you a target to work, and you'll never be able to just get your own targets put together. I was working back and forth with these students, and I have a wonderful assistant named David. And David would, they would send their stuff to David. David would kind of compile it for me, and then we would go through it. So I was really working with them, and they got so excited. And then as they were viewing each other's targets, they were super excited. The viewers were excited, the taskers, the people who gave them the targets were excited. And then the results were so fabulous and so accurate that they were actionable stuff. And that
Can you
made them,
give an example, Lori?
okay,
Like
I'm
an
gonna,
example of a question, just so people, because I think a lot
yeah,
of people need it to be like concrete for them to grasp it if they haven't done this work.
okay.
Like a
So I,
question that's like, this is the
as
question.
you can imagine, a lot of these were very highly personal questions.
Okay. And
So
don't share anything you
so
can't
yeah,
share.
so I have to kind of frame it a little bit vaguely, just because I don't want to give away people's personal information. But I got one thing that was submitted was a question about a job. Like, okay, a relative of mine. I'm kind of reframing it slightly, but a relative of mine is working for a company that is going to be doing a like a pitch to some big corporations, and the pitch is worth billions of dollars, not millions, billions of
Wow.
dollars, to produce some new technology that's like mind blowing. And so that was the first submission, was just that. And I was like, okay, but what's the question? Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool, but what's the question? So then, oh, well, the question is, how's this going to turn out? And will the corporations accept the bid? And okay, so one thing is yes or no questions we don't really waste time with in controlled
Yeah.
remote viewing, simply because you can use a pendulum to get a yes or no answer, right?
Yeah.
But I kept getting this sense there's a question behind this question that we really
Yes.
need to get to, right? So, and because if you don't get to the question behind the question, then when they see the results, they're like, oh, that doesn't quite scratch the itch that I thought it was going to
Yeah.
scratch. And it's because I didn't ask the question that I really needed to ask, right? And you'll find that if you're working with police, if you're working with archaeologists, they often think they know what they're asking, but they really are asking, they really need to ask a different question, right? So this is where my intuition has to come in, because I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
what is it that Bob really needs to know? I'm making that name up, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, what is it that Bob really needs to know? What is driving this question? And I'm like, Bob, or I make a video and I'm like, Bob, why are you asking this question? Then I'm like, okay, I actually think that Bob is worried about the results of this and how it might affect this very close relative. So then I'm like, is what's driving this a fear that something, that how this might affect your loved one? And then the answer was like, yes. I'm really worried about how this might affect my loved one between now and 5 years from now. So in this case, for example, the target is how my loved one will fare financially, and career wise, in happiness levels between now and 5 years from now. That's really the question. And so that's how we ended up reframing the whole thing, because that really was what this person really wanted to know. It really wasn't about the job and all that. That was just a major thing that was coming up right now.
You're making so I'm sorry to interrupt. You're making me think of something though, because I was reading your introduction before, and I know I haven't remotely scratched the surface of the work you have done though. actually with people trying to develop something for a corporation or trying to find an answer. And when you were describing Bob and his relative, what I imagined was, and it's probably just because my mind's going to the business utility of this, but is that, oh, what is the what is the design of the thing that will be the right thing, or the thing this corporation most wants, or that will be most successful in X endeavor? And that could, I'm just spitballing,
Yeah,
but whether it's a drug in development, or a discovery of something, or something mechanical to make something run better that no one's done yet, or
exactly.
something like that. And because I was thinking about even your ability, not knowing what it is, to sketch that piece of the plane.
Hmm, hmm.
I would imagine, or maybe it's more that your clients would come with that kind of question.
Yes, and actually, I've kind of experienced both sides of that coin in that there was I was I was approached many years ago. This was a long time ago, but I was approached by someone who wanted to pay me to do a target, and the target was to describe a future technology that would allow humans to communicate with interdimensional beings. And I wasn't told what I was going to be doing. I was just told the target is a technology, describe the target. But that was what was behind that tasking was, what we need a description of this thing. So as I started, I was told the target, I think I was just told the target's man-made. I don't remember. Or maybe I was told the target's a technology. I don't remember. But anyway, I started to imagine in my mind a rocket ship, because initially when you're given any information, you immediately get a visual in your mind usually. And my first visual was a rocket ship. And then I went to go touch it, thinking I was going to come up to this gigantic rocket ship and mentally touch it. And instead, it was just this little conical thing. And I went, "Oh, it's so tiny. It's just this little conical thing." And and so I'm touching it, and I said, "Oh, I think this is for communication. I think this is a communication device." And so I had hit on, of course, the goal of the thing, which was to communicate. And then I decided to go inside of it. So I go inside this little conical thing. I turn myself very tiny and I go inside. And inside, the walls of this little conical thing are covered with little tiny laser lights that are brightly all different colors. And the center of it has this coil that is like a slinky. If you got, for those of you who remember the metal slinkies, it was like a metal slinky, but the slinky was made of gold or gold colored material, metal. And then the slinky had these little flat surface of it had these little tiny black squares. And the whole thing was vibrating, and it would cause the black squares to move. And I knew that each black square contained information, and that these lights were reading the information on the black squares. And so as I'm, describing this thing, and so at this point, and whenever I'm doing a session, I'm always thinking, this could be total BS. I don't know, who knows?
Everybody has that feeling.
Yeah. I'm like, who knows?
Those are usually the best ones,
Yeah.
actually, though.
Yeah. And I have a mantra I teach my students, which is, give yourself permission and make SHIT up.
Yeah.
Give yourself permission to make stuff up. But anyway, so I'm describing this and I send this all in, and it's got sketches and all these diagrams and things. And so this person contacts Lyn Buchanan and says, "Well, I paid for 2 sessions. So like I paid for initial session and then a follow-up session. So what should I ask her to do in the follow-up?" And Lyn's like, "What could you ask her to do? She gave you schematics and all these details. What more could you ask her?" And so they came up with, well, let's ask her how the user uses it. How does a user use this thing?
Great question.
And so, and so I started going back into session. And the hilarious thing is they're thinking from their perspective, how would they use it? Like, how would the guy who's paying me use this machine, right? But I didn't interpret my psychic mind just immediately went to the other side of like how the other side is using it
Oh,
to
wow.
communicate, which my monitor thought was pretty hilarious. But the monitor's job is just to sit there and shut up. The monitor doesn't try to control the session in any way. So the monitor's just listening and taking notes, and I start describing how this interdimensional beings can communicate through this thing. And um and it became really fascinating because the interdimensional beings were explaining what they would want to communicate and how they would want to talk about frequencies and vibrations and what's happening in the world and some of the dangers that are occurring, that humans are doing to the planet and all this stuff. It was just like this fascinating session. But the interesting thing was that later, a lot of times, folks, when you do these sessions and you don't have any feedback. You have no way to prove that anything you got was right or wrong on some of them. Some of them we have very solid feedback, but other times we don't. Then inevitably, years later, you do end up getting information that validates what you were getting. So years later, probably maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, we had guests for dinner. And one of the guests said, "Oh, I read the most interesting article the other day. It was saying that they now have the ability to put all the knowledge that's ever been gained in the entire, in the entire world on a tiny little black dot that's about the size of a head of a pin. And they can cram it all into this little tiny, tiny thing. But the only problem is you need a lot of laser lights to read it." And I thought, "Oh my gosh, that sounds like that device that I described," because it had the little black dots that had information and it had these laser lights that had to read the information. And I didn't know at that time that that was even a thing. So it was really fascinating to me how I always will come up with information. To tell you another quickie story about how sometimes your feedback is delayed, before you
Yeah.
get validation. I was asked to work on a missing child case. So this entire family had been murdered.
Oh, good
And when the
Lord.
police, yeah, it was horrible. So when the police came upon the murder scene, the youngest child was missing. She was like 2 years old.
Mm.
And so they put out a missing person situation on her.
And you
Anyway,
have worked with law enforcement many times.
yeah, and yes, I worked for mom almost nonstop for 2 years,
Oh, wow.
and it was that becomes pretty draining, to be honest. To
Yeah.
do nothing but missing people cases because you're not
Oh,
always
I can
looking for
imagine.
victims. Sometimes you're looking for bad guys, and when you're
Oh,
looking for bad guys, that can be kind of a dark journey. And then, of course, if
I'm
you come
sure.
upon victims, that can also be pretty heartrending. So after 2 years, I was like, I think I need to change my remote viewing diet, and
Yeah.
switch to something else for a while. But anyway, so I was working on this missing child case, and I described, and I didn't know when I started the session on this particular time, I didn't know that I was working on a missing child case. I thought I was working a practice session because my then husband, or the husband, we were both kind of new at this at that time, and he didn't know that he shouldn't have been giving me missing people targets like that. And he had just gotten it off a poster in a post office, and wrote it up and said, "Hey, you want to do a session?" And didn't tell me what it was. And then
Ah,
I ended up describing their backyard. And it had a very unusual military green chemical storage tank behind the house where the murders took place. And I described that to a T, and just described the whole thing. And so the police contacted me because I kept getting a name that I kept setting aside, and the name turned out to be a town very close to where this all occurred, and it was the only town of that name in a 5-state radius.
wow.
So my then husband said, "You should really contact the officers in charge of this." So when I did, I wrote them a very carefully worded letter saying, because I didn't want them to think I was a nut, but I just said,
Yeah.
I'm a student of this discipline called controlled remote viewing, and thinking I was working on a practice target, my husband actually gave me this thing that you had on the missing person poster. And I said, "So if any of this information is useful to you, I'm grateful. But if not, please just throw it in the trash. Don't even worry about it." So I immediately got a phone call from from the investigating officer, who was just like, "Oh my gosh, can you tell me more?" He said, "We put this out and we got so many letters from supposed psychics, and not one of those letters contained one thing that we could count on." He said, "Your letter was full of correct information." And he said, "So, can you help us more?" And I was a brand new student pretty much. And I was just like, I don't know what to do. But because, I was so new at it. But the interesting thing is so that was in like 1997, maybe 1990. I think it was 1997 when this happened. Now, fast forward to 2011.
Oh,
Okay,
good lord.
2011, Jim and I, my husband Jim and I are on a road trip with our big motor home that we no longer have, but we had this big motor home. And we were taking a 4-month trip in this motor home, teaching remote viewing all the way up the East Coast. And then we ended up in near Los Angeles. We ended up in 10,000 Oaks, California teaching. And so we're in the forest and we've spent the night, at this campground, and we wake up and Jim says, we have a flat tire. Now this was a big bus, and those tires are like $500 each. And they were back then. I don't even know what they are now, but back then they were $500 each. And he said, we can make it. We had a lot of wheels, so he said we can make it to the nearest tiny town and see if we can get the tire fixed. So we drive to this little itty bitty town, and we and so he says, the guy says, well, we're going to have to lift this bus up on this big thing to change the tire, so we're going to need your wife to get out of the bus. So I go wait in tiny little dusty little office, and there's just a table in front of a couch, and on this table is a little skinny newspaper from the little town. And I pick this up, and there's the whole story of that murder that happened in 1997,
Oh my goodness.
and the missing child, and the whole everything. It was back in the newspaper because people had gone to prison. They caught these guys, put them in prison, and they had gotten the death sentence. But then they discovered that 2 of the guys who were put up to the murder by their dad were mentally incapacitated. And so they were like, so there was a big deal, like to undo the death sentence because these people were not mentally capable or competent. So I'm amazed, though, that here in this little dinky town, I'm finding feedback on this session that I did in 1997. And I go running out excitedly to tell Jim, like, you're not going to believe this. I asked the guy, can I have this newspaper? He said, sure. So I go running out, and I'm running towards Jim, and he's coming running towards me. And he's like, you're not going to believe this. There's nothing wrong with our tire. For some reason, the little cap got loosened during the night and it just lost air, but it's totally
Oh
fine.
my god.
I was just like, oh my gosh. So it's like the universe completely engineered it so that
Oh my
I could
god.
get feedback
Did
on
they
the whole
find
thing.
the little girl?
They did find her, but sadly, she also had been murdered. I mean,
Oh
so
my
it's
god.
not happy.
So
It's not a
sad.
happy ending in that sense that they, that they found her alive.
But
But
there was some justice served,
there was justice served,
and you
and
got that feedback. But they That's crazy. So crazy, but at least people were brought or some people were brought to justice, and possibly because of some of the information that you provided. I know a lot of times law enforcement won't tell you what happens, especially if it's ongoing, and it sounds like it was. I wanna ask you about an esoteric target you did, because I promised Kathy I would.
oh, okay, yeah. Ask me about that.
'Cause, what I wanna tell people too is that there are some targets, like, if you're new to remote viewing, people won't necessarily know just yet, but there are targets, like you said, you will get feedback on. Sometimes you won't get them for years. Sometimes you will get it right away, which
Mhm.
is like, "Yay." There are targets that it's almost impossible to really get feedback on, but you kinda can get some idea. You went on Coast to Coast AM, you've been on that show
Five
a
times.
bunch of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is huge. I mean, I think it's the largest overnight radio show in the world. So, the fact that you keep getting asked back on is, to your credit,
Thank you.
hugely. And Connie Willis was the host that night. Usually it's George Norrie, but I know you and Connie are friends. She's a popular guest host. And I think this was such a great idea. She gave you 3 esoteric targets to view before coming on the show, and you'd get the reveal on the show. I
Yes.
mean, I'll probably stick with the one esoteric target because I don't wanna keep you. I know it's getting late, but I thought this was unbelievable because you said something, and I'll tell you more later, that this wasn't even a thing you were interested in yourself before. It wouldn't have been on your radar in any way. I'm kind of naive to the whole thing, but your target was Bigfoot or the Sasquatch,
Yes, it was.
which is
It was
crazy.
it was interesting because when Connie said, "Hey, I've got this idea. I want to give you 3 targets." She didn't say they were esoteric. She just said, "I got 3 targets I want to give you. And I'd like you to view them completely from start to finish and then come on the show telling me what you got on the 3 targets, and then I'll tell you what the targets were."
I heard that episode and I almost fell out of my chair. And I'm so mad that they took it down because it's beyond 7 years old. We gotta petition them to get it back because it literally blew my mind, and I've seen and heard so many things from you where you've been so spot on, and I still almost fell off my chair. I might have actually fallen off.
Well, the funny thing was that I told Lynn, because Lynn and I are dear friends now. I mean, we've been friends for 30 years. And when I told him about it, we had just moved out to the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. And I said, well, my business is probably just going to fold because, I'm in the middle of nowhere. He said, oh, no, no. If Mohammed doesn't come to the mountain will come to Mohammed. And right after that, Connie asked me to do this. And I told Lynn, and he goes, and you're going to do that? And I said, yeah. I said, because it's either I'll do very badly and I'll retire, which will be great, or I'll do really well and my business is going to really even do better, which will also be great. So I sit down to do the first session and I put my pen on the paper and I went, oh no, it's Bigfoot. That was literally what
Which is
happened.
crazy.
I know. I just put it on. I went, oh no, it's going to be Bigfoot. And I was like, oh no, just tell me it's not Bigfoot so I can kind of put that out of my mind. And then I remembered my mentor always said, go for the unknown. If you know stuff about it and you feel polluted, then remember there's obviously unknown information or you wouldn't be asked to do it. So
About
just
everything.
go for the unknown. So I'm like, okay, I'll go for the unknown. And but I thought, I mean, my whole experience with Bigfoot is Harry and the Hendersons. I mean, it's like I have no interest in Bigfoot whatsoever. I don't even know if I believe in Bigfoot. That was where I was.
I'm with you on that,
Yeah,
and I
it's
almost do after your session.
Well, I do after my session because it ended up being such a momentous thing. And then the stuff that happened afterwards, that's what we got to talk about because so I
Definitely.
did the session and the session was interesting in that I felt that I really was communicating with this interdimensional being who had a lot of wisdom and love and just I didn't imagine I always imagined Bigfoot like a big ape, just like a big dumb bunny or whatever you want to call it. But this being was not like that at all. This being was amazingly intelligent and compassionate and loving and wise. And so I was really caught off guard by that because I would not have anticipated Bigfoot being that way. And then the biggest thing that I got out of the session was that when I was asking Bigfoot, like, how is it that you can be sometimes photographed, but nobody can ever find you? You're so elusive. And the answer was that just like a skunk has its smell, can shoot that stuff that's stinky, and rattlesnakes have the venom in their fangs, that Bigfoot's defense is time travel. And I was like, that just blew my mind because that was nothing I had considered. And it was sort of like, where someplace somebody photographs, where there's suddenly humans nearby, we can just suddenly just boom, be in another time zone, just switch, be in the same exact spot. But even if you can go from here to yesterday, suddenly you're gone, right? You appear to have vanished, but you've actually moved through time. And when I got that in my session, I thought, okay, Lori, you're really losing your freaking mind. And you can't say this on a radio show that has 2 million listeners because they're going to think you're absolutely insane. But I did, right? And so, so I go on the show, I share all this, and then it was almost like, well, tell us something we didn't know because apparently everybody that's into Bigfoot knows that Bigfoot is a time traveler. I had no idea.
I had no idea at all.
I didn't either. And then Mel Riley was a member of the Ho-Chunk tribe, even though he didn't have a drop of Indian blood. He was raised by the Ho-Chunk and it was truly a very honored member of the Ho-Chunk tribe. And he said, oh, everybody knows that Bigfoot is a time traveler. And he said, we have a legend in our tribe that a young brave many years ago was on his vision quest. He became ill and passed out. He woke up in a Sasquatch encampment. They had nursed him back to health. Then they walked him back to his camp. And when he walked into his camp, no one recognized him because it was 75 years later.
Oh my god.
And then we have a really good friend who's Navajo and was raised on the Navajo reservation. And so we talked to him and he said, oh yeah, everybody knows Bigfoot is a time traveler. So apparently all the Native American tribes
We're
know
the
that.
only 2 people
Yeah,
who
we're just
didn't
like,
know.
exactly. So, but the crazy thing was, okay, now this is where things get really crazy.
Before you tell that, because
Yes,
I know because I have a sense, not because
yes.
of anything psychic, just because I also tried to listen to more episodes, but you're sitting down, you're doing your session, you have just a randomly assigned number,
Mhm.
coordinate. You put your pen down on the paper, and even though you're not supposed to be getting psychic information just yet, until a later phase, you're like, "Oh, holy crap, it's Bigfoot."
Mhm.
You are feeling, seeing, hearing, smelling inside Bigfoot, observing Bigfoot, hearing. What is it that made you think, "Holy crap, this is Bigfoot"?
It wasn't any of those things. I just put my pen on the paper and instantly it was what we call claircognizance, clear knowing.
Yes,
I just suddenly knew. And I hadn't started viewing him yet, so I didn't get smells or, anything like that. I just suddenly just was like, "Oh no, it's Bigfoot." And I just knew that it was. And that happens sometimes, so we have different people that take controlled remote viewing. Some of them are naturally psychic, which I had a near death experience as a kid. And my psychic abilities were always very evident to my parents and to everybody, and that kind of a thing. My boss said, I hate having an office next door to you. I feel like I need to wear an aluminum hat, just stuff like that, because stuff would happen all the time. So here I go into this CRV and I get taught how to control that ability, which was awesome. But then we have a lot of people who've never had a psychic experience in their whole life of any kind, nothing out of the ordinary, and they become world-class remote viewers. So I just want to emphasize that for your viewers, that
absolutely.
you don't have to have had any talent at all. And you can still, this is a step-by-step learned discipline. So anybody can learn it. And
Absolutely.
and I have students who say, "Gosh, I wish I had known that sooner because I thought I had to be, have had psychic experiences and stuff, or I would have taken this a long time ago."
I wanna emphasize to everybody, Lori is an excellent, excellent teacher. I've taken many classes with you, some of them twice. Honestly, you're a thoughtful, thorough, patient, supportive, and very clear teacher. That's my
Thank you.
shout out to you and for you, Lori. I'm so sorry to drive you nuts with asking though, 'cause like, as someone who, again, has not ever really given Bigfoot any thought.
Mhm.
I know a whisper about the lore, probably less than the average person. So you're having this clear cognizant, immediate knowing. You put your pen down on the paper, but as you're going through the session and you're describing your various ideograms, this is a biological, and you're describing the
Mhm.
biological, and you're getting these descriptors, or now you're I don't know if you had a bilocation experience and you were present with Bigfoot or not.
No,
Um, but other things that you gathered, like, is it you who talked about Bigfoot's smell? I can't remember.
no.
Okay, you didn't get, like, 'cause I think I've heard something about, obviously, like, a wild animal smell. It sounds like I'm going totally off the rails here.
I don't remember. The main thing I remember is that I connected. We have a tool that we call the SI column, and I teach that in the intermediate course. And I was in the SI column, and I really felt like I was connecting just mentally, thought to thought, with Bigfoot. And
What Bigfoot is actually thinking and feeling.
yeah, well, just yes, and so we were able to carry on like literally like a conversation, but it wasn't verbal. It wasn't in language. It was more like understanding to understanding, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so that's where and I could ask a question just without even verbalizing it, and then the answer was there, and it was also kind of nonverbal, but just like this total understanding, and it kind of blew my mind. I remember asking about the family, like, "Do you have family?" "Yes, we have families. We have spouses and or partners, whatever, mates, I guess you would say, mates and children, and and all that. And then I asked, this is kind of interesting. I don't really talk about this part very much, but I asked, well, how do you reconnect? Like if you were out in the woods and you suddenly had to switch times, to another time, how do you find your family again? Like, how do you reconnect with your family? And the answer was love is the key that brings us back together. We use love like a frequency, and it just we find each other through that, which is still kind of above my pay grade for
Amazing.
complete understanding. But okay, so after this happened, we started having all kinds of phenomena occurring, physical phenomena. So like stuff started disappearing from the house, and then like so all these different things disappeared all at once. Some little, like some souvenirs I brought back from Wales disappeared, and then we bought a brand new Apple TV thing with the remote, and we got it home and I set it up, and I had the remote sitting right in front of me, and it suddenly just vanished. And we were in the Earth ship, which has no furniture in the living room. It has a built-in banks you can sit on. When we had cushions to sit on the floor, but there was no couch. So you couldn't have lost it in the couch cushions. It disappeared when it was sitting right in front of me. So all of a sudden I couldn't find it anywhere. And so we looked everywhere. It just had vanished. So we couldn't use our brand new Apple TV because we didn't have the remote. So the weekend came around and we said, well, let's just watch a DVD. So we put on a DVD. We're watching the DVD movie, and then in the middle of it, suddenly the Apple TV came on. So we're like, okay, how does it come on by itself in the middle of the DVD? And then went back off, and the DVD started playing again. And then the DVD stopped, and the Apple TV came on again. And Jim goes, okay, let's just go to bed. So we went to bed. And then a few nights later, we decided to try to finish the DVD. Or watch a different one. I don't remember, but the same thing happened. So finally I called Apple and I told the guy the whole story. I didn't tell him about Bigfoot. I just
I
said,
was gonna say.
no, I didn't tell him that story. I just said, we bought this new remote. I've misplaced it. We've looked everywhere. I can't find it. But we've been trying to watch DVDs, and Apple TV keeps coming on, and I'm wondering how does that happen? And he said, lady, I'd run out of that house so fast. I said, why? And he said, that cannot happen unless someone has the remote and is doing that.
Oh
It
my god.
absolutely cannot happen. So I ordered a new remote, got it. But then later, so all these things have been disappearing. And then later, suddenly in a little brown paper bag, all the stuff got returned in the bag. Everything that had disappeared suddenly reappears in a bag. And so then we had one of the fridges go out in the three Earth ships that are lined up, in a line. So we were taking the food out of one fridge and walking to this other house in one of the other Earth ships. And we had carried like 3 loads of groceries there. And on the third time we get up there, all the doors to the house are locked. And I mean, we were doing a constant thing, like this was all happening at the same time. And I said, Jim, did you lock the doors? And he said, no, I didn't lock the doors. It can't be locked. It must be stuck. We just were here
And you
2
don't
days.
have neighbors right
No, no, we're
close to
sitting
you
on
that could be
120
pranksters.
acres. We're on 120 acres by ourselves. There's nobody else there.
You and a
So,
prairie dog, baby.
yeah. And so Jim's like, there's no way this door can be locked because we just opened it like 20 minutes ago when we brought the last load. So he tries to jiggle it, and sure enough, it is locked. And so then I go out to the car, and the car door starts locking. The doors start locking on the car right in front of my eyes. And then sometimes they would go lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock, unlock, right in front of my eyes. It's just locking and unlocking. And I was just standing there with just watching it. So all these crazy things start happening. I watched a fork fly across the sky, and across the kitchen. Jim's glasses started sliding across the table. We had a chair lift up on 2 legs and then gently set back down. That happened the day that the Capitol got stormed on January 6th.
Oh my god.
Yeah, so all these really weird things were just happening all the time. And so I was talking to Connie Willis. She's kind of the Bigfoot expert. And she said, well, you live right on the edge of the national forest. Our west gate opens into the national forest. And she said, and they always close national forests at 5 o'clock because all these interdimensional beings live in the national forest. So it makes sense that you'd have Bigfoot there. Well, here's the crazy part of the story. This is like, folks,
That's not the crazy part.
we have
Okay.
not even gotten to the crazy part yet. Okay, so now I have true confessions. When I was 15 years old, I ran away with my boyfriend.
Okay.
Yes, I had been a very compliant child up until that point, but then I fell madly in love with this kid, and we decided to run away together. So so we ran away together. Miraculously, I never got pregnant with this guy, thank God. But so we
This
ran
is
away.
really the true confessions
This is the truth
episode.
confessions. So I ran away with this guy to North Carolina, and I thought I was just so madly in love, just, oh my gosh, puppy love, that first puppy love can be so intense, right? You're so young and emotional and dramatic. Long story short, my parents found me, they brought me back, and eventually, I broke up with him, and that was the end of that. But I never forgot that guy. And I was so devastated by the whole experience that I was like, I will never fall in love again. I will never get married for love. I never want to experience that level of pain ever again. So I felt like it kind of it kind of made me not want to ever be in love again. And when, in fact, when I met my current husband, who is the love of my life, one of the first things I told him in one of our conversations was about my running away with this boy and how I kind of broken because of that. And I didn't think I could ever
Mm.
be in love again. And it was hilarious because I said, I don't think anybody could ever handle me. And right then I heard his voice in my head think, I could. And I said, did you just think I could? And he goes, yes. And I heard it in his voice. And
Don't
so,
date a psychic.
yeah, so it was, yeah, he's talked
No
about that.
secrets.
But anyway, so it was like this crazy thing, and I never ever, and then I had heard that he had died, right? And I just never knew whatever happened to him. So I kind of had this unclosed chapter from when I was 15 that kind of never got closure, right? So Jim and I are driving the 90-minute drive on our way to a doctor visit in Albuquerque, and I was a moderator on a big remote viewing group, and one of 36 moderators. So every now and
Wow.
then, as a moderator, you get a little dink in your phone, and it says, Joe Doe wants to join your remote viewing group, and then you hit approve, and you let Joe Doe into the group, right? So I get a dink, and I look down, and it's this guy's name wants to join your remote viewing group, and I was like freaked out, and I said, Jim, this thing just came, and it's the name of the guy that I ran away with when I was 15, and it wasn't a real common name. It wasn't like John Doe. And Jim goes, well, find look at his profile, see if it's really him. I click on the profile, and it was him. It was a 60-year-old version of him, but it was him. And I was so flipped out because I'm like, oh my gosh, and what are the chances of 36 moderators that I would be the one to look at it? And so I immediately respond to him, which I never responded to these people, but I sent him a message, and I was like, are you John Doe that lived in this such and such a place and blah, 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 blah. And he said, yes. And then he said, is this Lori? And I said, yes. And he said, oh my gosh. He said, the reason I'm asking to join the remote viewing group is because I belong to a Bigfoot group on Facebook. And the leader of that group just notified us that a professional remote viewer on coast to coast remote viewed Bigfoot.
Oh my God.
And I wanted to learn more about remote viewing. And I said, I was the remote viewer that did that. I was the professional remote viewer. And so
It's
so
a crazy story.
it was
Crazy
crazy.
story.
And the crazy thing was that, and he proceeded to tell me and send me recordings. He said the reason he got into the Bigfoot group was because he owns 13 acres in the middle of Tennessee, and he has a family of Bigfoot living on his property. And he sent me recordings of them calling to each other. He said he goes in his house, and they've done all kinds of crazy stuff in his house. And every night he puts out like a basket with like crackers and peanut butter and stuff in a basket. And then he comes in later, and the jar of peanut butter will be on his table with the lid on it, empty. And it's a brand unopened new jar when he puts it out there. And then he said also that he had a situation happen where one of the members of the Facebook group said, I've lost my daughter's little pile of toys. She had this pile of toys, and it vanished right in front of us. Can any of you see it? And this person lived like in Missouri, and he walked into his kitchen, and there were little girls' toys on his table in his kitchen in
That's
Tennessee.
just crazy.
And so he said Bigfoot is a gatherer. It's like a connector, and it connects people. So that's how he and I got reconnected. And so it was just really phenomenal. So we ended up getting on a phone call together. It took a little bit of courage on my part because he was like, let's get on a phone call. And I was like, no, no, no. And I thought that for like about a couple of months. And then finally, Jim was like, maybe it would be good to get on a phone call. So I did. I got on a phone call with him, and he had a lot of leftover questions from that period of time when we were both 15, and I did too. So we cleared up a lot of stuff that our 15-year-old selves needed to clear up. And once we
Yeah.
did that, we're not in touch anymore because we took care of that, and that was just close that chapter, and we were, you know
Checked
what
it
I
off.
mean? Yeah, we were able to check that one off of the list. But it was such a crazy thing. It makes me say, what is reality? Is this a simulation? Are we like somehow connected into some computer game? Because it's so bizarre. That whole story is just so crazy that I even have trouble believing it. It's
Well,
like,
I mean, I'm learning more about Bigfoot than I ever thought there was to learn, honestly, because I just didn't know anything about it. So time traveling, little bit of a prankster vibe there with stealing your stuff, trying to gaslight you kind of, and then putting it back,
yes.
fooling around with electronics, but connecting you. to somebody you had some healing to do with. And I mean, honestly, you guys were so young. I mean,
Yeah, I
but
mean, you're still really a baby at 15, can you
oh my
imagine?
God, absolutely. And how amazing that it came full circle like that, and then the healing was done, and you could move on.
Yeah, it totally healed that part of my life. It's crazy, but you have these different stages of life that were wounds. I mean, like, there's people who are working on wounds that they got when they were 3 years old, right?
Oh,
It's like,
sure,
so we still have those parts of ourselves that carry those wounds, and it was so wonderful to be able to get, a closure and a resolution on that. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so that was a kind of a crazy story, but yeah, so that's the story of the Bigfoot session.
And you were so accurate too. I mean, I would have been blown away even if it was just that. I don't want to say just that because, but you're a uniquely accurate remote viewer across topics, and I think your open-mindedness and curiosity also helps you tap into what your students need to learn.
That's my biggest passion, is just teaching. I love seeing people just the way they light up, the way they have revelations, the way they discover new potentials within themselves. That's what that's really what gets me up every morning, really. It just gets what gets me out of bed. There's been a few times where I've been like sick or tired or whatever, having something going on in my life, and I'd be like, "Oh, Jim, I think really should retire. I mean, I'm getting older. My sister's retired years ago, and here I am still working, like working my butt off." And Jim would say, "Well, the thing is," and Lyn Buchanan has also said this. In fact, Jim has ganged up on me with Lyn Buchanan, and they say, "You don't know that you might be teaching someone who's going to discover the secret to 0 point energy, or to solve major problems through their remote viewing skills, and so,
Absolutely.
that's a huge thing for me, for sure.
Absolutely. I just to put a bow on this, and then I won't keep you because I know I've kept you for far longer than I promised I would. But what I'm taking from what you just said too is that it's great to be able to learn things that are interesting or solve a business problem or whatever. Those are still perfectly fine things to tap into. But remote viewing can be a tool for healing oneself, like
Mhm,
looking, saying, "What is this?" Move to the thing I most need to know to heal this issue, and
mhm,
describe.
mhm.
You'd probably phrase it better, but I'm trying to phrase it in a somewhat remote viewing
Yeah,
questiony way, or move to the thing that will help me most improve my health at this time,
yeah,
or move to the thing that will help me be a better parent or better at my job
yeah,
or
in one of those things that we did with the students, one of the targets was, resolving a family conflict. Like the target is the resolution to a family conflict that's been ongoing, and how, what is the best way to resolve this family conflict, so that you can use it for so many practical things.
100%. Lori, I feel like I could talk to you all night, but where is the best place for people to find you, find out about your books, your workshops and courses, your events, anything else that you want to let them know
Yes,
about?
I would love to share that with people. We are in the process of redoing our website, but you can still go to the old website, still there, before we redesign it totally. But it is https:// intuitive specialists with an S at the end of specialists.com. And there's tons of free stuff. In fact, you'll see a tab that says free stuff, and there's a lot of stuff
Absolutely.
there. There's also a bunch of blogs, and a lot of those blogs are little mini classes, truly. So the blog, I've been writing blogs for the past 15 years. So there are a lot of blogs there, folks. And some of them are just helpful, but others of them are really like really point by point how to do certain things with remote viewing. And then also, there's a free class that you can go to. And do you have a way to like post that on your thing
Yep,
if I
I'm gonna
need a
put
link?
everything in the show notes.
Okay,
So
good.
I'll
So,
put links for all these things, including
okay,
your
great.
social media if you want.
Yeah, so that yes, of course we do. We have an intuitive specialist YouTube channel. We have intuitive specialists. There's a media page on the website where you can see a lot of my interviews that I've done. with people. And then there's also the books, Monitoring and Boundless. I would suggest starting with Boundless. I really wrote Monitoring for my students that are really into remote viewing so they can learn, because there's no book on the planet that there's no classes that
You're
teach you
right.
monitoring. So monitoring is the only book on the planet that's been written about monitoring. So there's monitoring, and so there's the books, and then we have video courses, and we just came out with 2 new video courses and are about to come out with another one. So that'll make 6 video courses
Wow.
that are self-paced. We have basic controlled remote viewing. We call it practical remote viewing when it's a video course, but so basic, intermediate, and advanced practical remote viewing. Then we also have a video course on associative remote viewing. That's the one people like to take with them to the casino
Yeah.
and use for
It
lottery and
works.
all that stuff.
It
That's
works.
associative remote viewing. And then we now also are coming out with a project management course, because if you discovered the key to 0 point energy, what do you do with that? Like, what do you do with that information? And if you wanted to mount a project with a lot of professional remote viewers, how would you do it if you needed to get answers on something? If you don't know how to run a remote viewing project, then that one is about to come out. And
Oh,
so,
great.
yeah, so those are the 6 courses, is the free master class, and then we have the basic, intermediate, advanced, and then we have ARV, and we're coming out with the project management course in just a few weeks. And we're getting ready to launch into Latin America. We have the basic course, the master class, completely in Spanish. You can watch the videos in Spanish. I am fluent in Spanish. We also have they're right now they're translating all the YouTube videos into Spanish. So we're really excited about that launch. Right now we're testing all the systems so that as people want to purchase things or whatever and get into things, they won't run into tech problems, hopefully, when you're doing it across the world. And so there's just a lot happening. There's a lot going on for an old lady.
You're a very young lady. Time seems to stop for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You don't look like you've aged at all to me.
Thank
I
you.
feel like you look exactly the same as when I met you. How many years ago now?
A while. I think it's these.
Oh, these wonderful lights.
I'd say seriously, the more the years go by, the brighter the lights
You know
get.
what's hilarious is Zoom has a feature now that will put you can choose eyebrows to put on you and lipstick. And then it'll enhance your face and stuff and your coloring. And I did it the other day in just a meeting with with this guy who's like one of my business partners. And it was so hilarious because at one point I went like this, and he said the eyebrows on the back of your hand.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
It was hilarious. I had lips and eyebrows on my hands.
Should have remote viewed what would happen if you do that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It was
Oh,
one thing to keep in mind is that the subconscious mind loves to laugh, and laughter is one of the highest vibrations. And so, years ago, I was talking with Mel Riley, who was the very first remote viewer ever inducted into the applications arm in Fort Meade of how to use remote viewing for spying. And then he was the only guy who was in there for 2 tours of duty. So he was there doubly long than anybody else, that any of the other ex-military guys. But I was talking with him, and he said, "You're going to become known for the fun remote viewing teacher.
aw,
You're going to be the fun one." And it is true though. I just love to have fun, and I love for my students to have fun. Because you don't if you get too serious about it, or I remember we asked somebody, what do you want to do with your remote viewing? It's like, I want to be the best remote viewer who's ever lived. It's like, scary. So
that's
we
kind
want to
of not a good goal.
so you just want to have a good time and give yourself permission to make stuff up, give yourself permission to make mistakes, and just lighten up, and you'll find that your remote viewing will become really fun and really accurate. And it's just a great skill to have. And I used to call it the survival skill of the future, but I think the future's here.
Oh my
So
god,
we
yes,
need
it
it
is.
now more than ever.
Don't we ever.
We really do.
Lori, thank you so much again for coming on the show and talking about your really compelling and interesting journey, your teaching, and all of the wonderful things you're offering, and sharing all these stories that I just, it just makes you want to remote view everything, everything under the sun, right? And I'll put all
Oh.
the links in the notes. But again, Lori, thank you so much for joining me. This has been another episode of Curious Explorers. If you enjoyed the episode, and I know you did, make sure you like, share, leave us a comment, tell us what you want to hear more of. And of course, as always, until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. Bye for now.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
You've just listened to the Curious Explorers podcast with the Kathy Kelly and Traci Stein. If you enjoyed the episode, remember to like, share, follow, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. And of course, until next time, stay curious.
The paranormal is real. It is real. The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real. It is real.